My name is Doug Hiller. I'm an orthopedic surgeon who specialized in sports medicine and did a lot of general orthopedics and a lot of foot surgery during my career. I'm also a sports medicine researcher. I'm focused on triathlon and endurance exercise. I was always interested in medicine. I had an uncle who I watched go through his medical school and residency and then start his practice. And I thought it was he was an amazing guy, and I thought it was a fascinating thing to do. It was something that he loved because he made a difference every day in what he did. He helped people who weren't going to get better without him. He took care of everybody in his community and was proud of that. And that was always on my list. However, when he took me at age 16, when we were visiting in the New Bern, North Carolina, he took me to the ER so I could get an idea of what was going on. And he reduced the kid's fracture. I heard the bones crunch and woke up on the floor. So I thought, well, that's the end of my career. He reassured me that the more sensitive you are to begin with, usually the less sensitive you end up, and it kind of worked that way for me. But in between, my dad was a PhD physicist, and that was kind of what I planned to be. I studied physics and I liked it, but I didn't love it, and thought about everything. And finally, at age 24, having just gotten back from sailing to Tahiti on a yacht race and deciding I really couldn't stay in Tahiti despite the lovely girl there. She didn't belong anywhere else, and I didn't belong there. I sat down at the place I had with my friends on a hill overlooking Honolulu on December 17th, 1974, and decided I am going to make my decision. I've been thinking about it every day for a decade, and I'm going to decide today what I'm going to do. I had green Kona coffee beans that I roasted and made a couple of pots of coffee and sat down and made two lists. Ultimately, it came down to law or medicine. I liked law because my grandfather had been the assistant director of the U.S. General Accounting Office and loved the law and everything about it. And I thought there were good things to be done with the law, and I thought of medicine because of my uncle. And so I wrote two lists. One was all the good things and the bad things about the law, and one was all as far as I was concerned, and the other was the good things I imagined and bad things I imagined and had witnessed about medicine. So I thought about my roommate, who was a brand new lawyer who'd gone to the UCSF Law School, Hastings, and came home, and he was getting ready to have his first case, and he overslept. And I kind of thought, the way I feel about the law, I'd probably oversleep my first case too, so I guess I'm not doing the law. What are the challenges of practicing in remote areas is a really good question. I was trained to be a university orthopedic surgeon and hopefully a chairman. Other guys who went through my orthopedic programs did that. And I kind of aspired to that, but I moved home to Hawaii after doing orthopedic internship actually at Pennsylvania Hospital, a research fellowship at the Pennsylvania Hospital, and orthopedic residency at the Campbell Clinic, which is the oldest one in the country, and fellowship in foot surgery, and then a fellowship in sports medicine at Duke, and had a wonderful practice on Oahu in Honolulu. I was a team doctor for the UH Wahine, the women's teams, and I was a team doctor for 6 different high school teams. What I noticed helping to take care of the high school athletes is that a lot of them had no access to good care, and the coaches were great people who really devoted themselves to the kids, but really didn't know much about medicine. And there were kids who would dislocate their shoulders 3 times in a season and keep going back and playing again. And There were athletic trainers in the private schools, but really none except for volunteers. Like there was a physical therapist at Roosevelt High School who showed up every game he'd gone there, and he acted as their trainer. He was awesome. But most of the schools had no team doctors, and they had no athletic trainers. The University of Hawaii had a training program, but no jobs for the athletic trainers. Two of my good friends and partners in medicine were my PA, Dennis Shimada, and our physical therapist, Mike McCarthy. We had a little powwow and decided, well, what we are going to do is go out and provide them with athletic trainers, and I will be the doctor for any school we can't find somebody else for. And they started going out to the schools and talking to the coaches, and the coaches were kind of reluctant. Well, we don't want people telling us what to do, but it would be nice. So we tried it out. And I called up my friends in the medical community, and we ended up having doctors for all the schools on Oahu, team doctors. And we ended up covering these 6 schools. And at the end of the year, the principals and the athletic directors at the schools came to us and said, well, will you help us support a bill through the legislature to put athletic trainers in every school in the state? And this had been tried before. A friend of mine named Alan Richardson, who was a brilliant guy who was one of my mentors, had tried, and I thought, man, he was a U.S. national team swimmer. He's famous locally. His father was an orthopedic surgeon here. If he can't do it, nobody can. But they asked us, so we tried, and as it turned out, we passed the first law, and so far as I know, the only law in the United States requiring athletic trainers in every school in the state, which we now have. There are a lot of rural schools here, and that was kind of one of my first tastes with rural medicine. I was a trained foot surgeon and had taken care of a lot of diabetic feet in Memphis, Tennessee, where I did my foot fellowship, and had talked to my mentor there, Rear Richardson, about the challenges of leprosy, Hansen's disease, and the fact that we had a colony here, and actually ended up being the orthopedic surgeon at Kalaupapa. My choice to go to North Hawaii Community Hospital was really interesting. I had set up clinics on the Big Island after starting my practice on Oahu in the big university practice, and being very involved in subspecialty care of orthopedics and sports medicine and foot surgery and doing some total joints. And I actually had a wonderful practice with an amazing group of guys. They could have been the orthopedic group at Cornell or Harvard. We had great patients, but the island seemed very crowded to me. I grew up on Oahu when there were maybe 250,000 people here, and when I came home there were 4 times that many with the same number of miles of road. And something about the Big Island just called. I set up a clinic and it got busy very quickly. I was asked to meet with a guy named Earl Bakken, who had invented the implantable cardiac pacemaker, started a company called Medtronic, which is now the biggest medical supply company in the world, and talked to him. He was a really nice guy with a real vision for the right way to do things in medicine, which was what he called high tech, high touch. So people need to be recognized for who they are and what they need, and they deserve the very best care. One of our main partners in this was the Cleveland Clinic, and they came out and gave us advice, and actually we got our radiologists from the program there who were absolutely superb. We had the CEO, who was also a surgeon, come out and talk with us several times about how to set up our programs, and the goal was to be the best in every way. And the hospital actually became an amazing place over the years with all the effort that went into it. Well, I think my career, in a way, was giving back to the community, and that was the whole point of it. And aside from being on call every day for 10 years and then every other night, basically after that for the rest of my career, I think when I went back and looked at it, I was on call at least 2 out of every 3 nights for the last 40 years. Another passion of mine is research. My father was a PhD physicist, and he taught me how to think and to have no respect, not in a rude way, but for opinions and what everybody knows. He said, it's usually wrong if everybody knows it. Remember when the earth was flat? Remember when Vioxx was safe? Remember all these things that everybody knows? Well, they don't really know that, and they don't actually really deeply believe it. That's just kind of what we learn, and we're told it. I got a job at the Institute for Environmental Medicine, which is a NASA, Navy, and Air Force lab at the University of Pennsylvania, where they could take astronauts up to 100,000 feet of altitude in a chamber and test a spacesuit, or take divers down to 1,600 feet of sea level of seawater, where they were breathing argon, neon, and oxygen as a liquid, and it took 3 weeks to decompress. That was pretty cool. The job there was being a medical supervisor for the hyperbaric chambers. Number one, there were 3 of us. They took people, quote, down, they compressed people in the chambers for diabetic wounds and neuropathy and a bunch of other stuff, and we'd supervise that. Occasionally we'd get somebody flown in what's called a monoplace, a one-place chamber from the oil fields or some offshore diving project, and deal with that, which was exciting and cool. Another thing was doing a pure oxygen toxicity experiment where we gave people 3 atmospheres of oxygen, which is called PS3 or PS5. It's in the Journal of Applied Physiology. That's an experiment which probably could not be done again, but it's the definitive experiment for if you want to know the progression of oxygen toxicity. We used medical students because they'll do anything, and didn't hurt anybody, thank God. It was really fascinating. But the other thing was, with all this equipment and NASA blood work, we could do anything we wanted for our 3rd project, and I did. After rounding up a whole bunch of people at the lab, I rounded up, or they showed up to do the Iron Man in the lab, and we asked each other a lot of questions. And one of my questions from having raced was, is the heart ever a limitation to human exercise? And everybody knew, and it was in the Guyton textbook, that skeletal muscle always fatigues before cardiac muscle. Therefore, you can never have the heart be a limit to exercise. But I've been watching 60-year-old people exercise in the heat for 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 hours and wondered if maybe something changed in their heart during that. And I asked our friend Pam Douglas, who was the fellow for echocardiology with one of the people who invented echocardiology at the University of Pennsylvania, what she thought. She said, wow, that's a great question. Let's go talk to my boss. And we went and talked to Dr. Rychek, who said, wow, that's an interesting question. Why don't we do that? So we'll send a team out to Kona next year for the Ironman, and we'll test people before and after. But I want you to know, Doug, that if Pam does this and it ruins her career because she finds out what everybody already knows, that's going to be a bad thing. I said, hey, I'm just going to be an orthopedic surgeon. What do I know? But I did ask the question, and it's up to her. She said, let's do it. And so we actually did the experiment, and it didn't ruin her career. She discovered cardiac fatigue, and that's the name of the paper. And it was the first paper that really demonstrated that. And as far as ruining her career, she went on to be, I believe, head of cardiac research at Beth Israel Harvard, chair at Duke of cardiology, and president of the American College of Cardiology. So she did okay, despite my best efforts. The other thing we were interested in, and in 1984, I did the Ironman in 1982, 83, and 84. In 1984, I set up an experiment to draw blood pre and post Ironman to see what kinds of things changed. And I got a friend of mine from high school, Dean Wong, was the head pathologist in Kona, to agree to do I didn't get him, he very generously volunteered to process the samples, and we discovered hyponatremia of exercise, which had never been published when we did this. And it changed the way everyone in our endurance sports world was using IVs, because if you become salt depleted one way or another, and you give somebody fluid which will deplete them further, you can kill them. And everybody was giving them, not everybody, but lots of people were giving them what's called half normal saline. So that immediately changed, and people began looking for this, and it changed the way we treated people forever. One of the favorite moments of my life was in 2019 in Lausanne, Switzerland, when I was given the Michel Genoux Award in the Hall of Fame ceremonies. Very amazing and very humbling. My plans for the future, I have been thinking about for a very long time, probably ever since I left. I came home to be with my family, just watch my grandchildren grow up and spend time with my daughter and her husband, and reconnect with old friends, of which I have quite a few left, fortunately. Sailing friends and high school friends that we taught each other guitar chords and got in trouble with, and they still tell bad jokes, which is somehow reassuring after 60 years. I feel really lucky to be able to be living back here. It's a really expensive place, but I, with the help of friends, found this wonderful place I live in now. It's a marina community, and I have a sailboat down at the end. There's a stream in front and a waterfall up the hill about 50 yards from me, which my grandchildren love. Notable things to me over my career and life have been my involvement with the Olympic sport of triathlon, and actually the evolution of the Olympic sport of triathlon. When I did the Ironman in the early 1980s, I met some people who were absolutely obsessed with the idea of taking the sport to the Olympics. They said, this is not an Olympic sport, this is the Olympic sport. We've got to do this. And a guy named Les McDonald was one of those truly amazing people. I found in my life 2 or 3 people I would really follow anywhere. Well, he was one of them, and he ended up having a meeting with the president of the IOC and had a conversation where he was told, look, triathlon is a great sport, but the Ironman is too long. We can't shut down entire cities around the world for 8 or 12 hours. But if you want to use a shorter version of the sport, we will support you going to the Olympic Games. And we've talked about it, whoever, the IOC committee and their subcommittees. And they sent a guy in 1989 to the first Olympic sport that was called the International Triathlon Union. So after that, there were several other meetings, and then in 1994, triathlon was declared an Olympic sport. I got elected in 1989 to the medical committee, and the way you get elected to the medical committee in an Olympic sport is your country recommends you, nominates you to the Congress votes, and they pick 7 people, and they try to make it half and half men and women, but 7 people who become medical committee meetings. I got to be the chair of the medical committee for 14 years through 3 Olympic Games, where I was an official as a result. Because the way they pick the chair of the medical committee is that the elected members vote. So a very high honor, as you can imagine. It was really an amazing honor to get to be present kind of at the birth of the sport. When I first did it in 1982, it was these crazy people. We actually had a guy riding a balloon tire bike wearing a buffalo horns, and he actually swam in the Buffalo Head too, to unbelievable high-tech stuff now where people do 2:30 marathons after riding their bike for 27 miles an hour or whatever, and swimming 2.4 miles in 50 minutes. It is unbelievable what the sport has become and how superhuman it's become and how well known everything is and how little everybody else nowadays, including the athletes, know about the incredible history of the sport. So that has been one of the most wonderful parts of my life, aside from my children. And if I had to pick one experience that taught me the most, I would pick 2. The first one was I was a junior resident. I had done an internship, and I'd done medical school, an internship, and I'd been at the trauma center, the Elvis Presley Regional Memorial Trauma Center in Memphis. Yes, that's really it. And it was the busiest blunt trauma center and the 2nd or 3rd busiest after Baltimore shock trauma, and one of the 3 or 4, as I recall, busiest trauma centers in the United States, which is saying a lot. You're competing with Detroit and every big city you can imagine. The second one happened when I was a senior resident. I guess it was a year or 2 later. I had a lot more experience. I'd been operating with a guy named Clarence Wattridge, who's kind of a world-famous neurosurgeon who'd seen everything and done everything. And again, shock trauma by air and neurosurgery on the roof. And then a few minutes later, and then probably 10 minutes later, they had x-rayed her. They said this was a girl at high school graduation whose boyfriend had driving the car, had a head-on. And he was pretty much okay, but she had a terrible depressed skull fracture. And Clarence said, look, Doug, I'm going to take it to the OR and I'll call you when I'm done, and you can go in and fix the femur. So I took care of other stuff, and of which there was plenty, and went in when he called, and they were putting a turban on her head. And he looked at me, he said, Doug, there's a high probability this girl's going to die, and if she survives, there's a high probability she's going to have significant brain damage. I have a patient in the OR at the Baptist, which is a hospital across the street that had 2,200 beds and 55 ORs. I've got to go over there, and there's a resident who has this other patient that he's taking care of, and I need to get over there, so I want you to talk to the family and give them a realistic picture of what can happen here, but give them hope. So I went in and fixed her femur in about 50 minutes. We did a great job. The same nurse. She looked perfect, and I just then went to talk to her parents. And gave her an honest appraisal of what was going on as gently as I could. And I did offer him hope, but we cried together. For me, one of the great historic events I got to personally witness was the start of triathlon in the Olympic Games, Sydney 2000. I had been involved in the sport since 1982 and involved in the Olympic or hopeful Olympic part of the sport since 1989, and had put on 2 Olympic qualifying World Cup events, which resulted in one of our best athletes it was her last chance to qualify, Sheila Taormina. She was an amazing woman, had been a medalist in another Olympic sport. And then being involved in the medical planning and for triathlons worldwide to have it happen at the Olympics. So we had a race here in Hawaii at Waikoloa, and the run was on the golf course, and there was a picture famous of this incredible woman named Michaela Jones. It showed her winning the Healing Island World Cup Triathlon in 2000, and that picture was chosen by NBC as their website photograph for the Olympic Games. I think we got 54 million hits on that. What does being a Marquis listee mean to me? Well, it means a legacy for my family, and it's also a way to perhaps have more power to do some of the good things I want to do.